The Reprehensibles, Chapter 3. The Earth Transitway hummed along its basin through T25, which in an earlier time was the town of Glasgow, Massachusetts, of the former United States of America. But the old forms knew no meaning in this T, a subdivision of the North American quadrant. Each of the continents was divided into quadrants as people clamored for every possible living space under the thick, gray, polluted skies. For the Earth's surface was 95% occupied, and there was even talk of expanding settlements on the barges of the sludgy oceans. The land occupation fit almost an exact pattern about the globe. There were still areas left, such as reserves and farms under artificial environments. The computers spread like capillaries through every nook and cranny of this world, with everything coordinated through the central circuits of Earth City in the southern Atlantic. And apart from the 5% unoccupied areas, were packed into 3 district living patterns. Nomadic barbarians, criminals, and those without adequate benefits had been herded into massive rectangular plots, hundreds of square kilometers in size. These camps were surrounded by a white force field barrier, 30 meters high and 16 meters thick. The inhabitants were given dwellings by the computer-advised government, the quadrant, and also depended on the quadrant for enriched powdered food. However, they were forced, because of water shortages, to drink from the local ground and river supplies, contaminated over centuries. The water consumption, along with the periodic exposure to ultraviolet radiation, passed through the near-depleted ozone layer, causing their skin to become tainted green. Thus, they were called Greenies, dreaded if they escaped from their camps, and totally misunderstood by those more fortunate. The most fortunate lived in the habitats, high-rising structures 30 levels above the ground and 30 levels beneath. They spanned thousands of kilometers in length and sometimes crisscrossed each other. Billions were housed in the habitats, which, like the lunar settlements, were enclosed in all-encompassing clear Zambian. Food was no problem in this controlled environment, as it was grown on the roofs and shipped to the families below. Although sophisticated water filtration and distillation systems provided a more than adequate supply at all times. Together, the habitat dwellers and Greenies comprised almost half of the Earth's population, with the rest on the outside. These people, the outsiders, did not have the comfort of pure environments. They were covered with screening lotions from their cleaners to protect them from the clearest days. Most of the time, however, they braved the cold weather, as the polluted atmosphere had not produced the dreaded greenhouse effect, but a chilly opposite climate. The outsiders were shielded from the cold in 3-storied, windowless dwellings called Zambian modules. The modules ran continuously down the streets of the T, forming huge blocks. They possessed a certain phosphorescence, tinted in varying colors, which aided in keeping the streets lighted at night. However, it was the streets that were the main source of light, the white silcoplast surfaces glowing brightly. Personal movers resembling drainage covers ran like bottle caps down the sides of streets, with each mover corresponding to an individual family's module. People were allowed entrance by communicating via computer slots atop waist-high poles next to the movers. Inside, the food, Supron, an enriched goopy liquid, was brought to the outsiders by pipelines from production plants. Water was piped in raw form, and had to be distilled by miniature units under the sink. If families had proper benefits, they could add minerals or sweet-tasting ingredients to the water. They were called families, but they could not be strictly considered as much, for no one on the outside was allowed to conceive their own children. They had to submit to a request to the baby banks, and the limit was 1 child per family, child that was not even their own. Maria Almonte was one of those artificially conceived and externally grown babies. Her almond-shaped eyes reflected in the windows of the transitway as it passed the outside modules. It was not a cheerful ride for the curly-haired girl who lived on the outside for all of her 24 years. Her job as a production analyst required that she take the route from the modules to a tiny alcove 29 levels deep in the habitat. It was her job to help the computers coordinate food shipments from the roof farms to the habitat families. She seemed in a daze as the packed transitway continued along the basin. "Hello, Maria," said her friend Masha as she edged her way up the aisle. "Hey, Maria, snap out of it." "Oh, I'm sorry, Marcia," she said in a squeaky voice. "I was just thinking about the next few days." "Oh, you're lucky. Most outsiders don't have habitat people fall in love with them." "I would have seen Terrance last night, but he had to stay the night in Earth City," explained Maria. "Ah, the city," said Marcia from the aisle. "I'd like to just see the city. His job brings him all over, I take it." "Yes, he's back for a few weeks. You have it all planned out, don't you?" Maria smiled as she thought for a few seconds. "When I get him, Marcia, I'll be out of those stinking modules," she said as she pointed to them. "I'll be a habitat dweller, without the slightest regret," she confessed as the computer sounded.
T25, 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 S11, S11.
"That's me, Marcia," said Maria as she moved into the aisle. "Have a good time with Terrance," said Marcia as Maria became compressed in the standing group. "Thanks, Marcia," she said as she squeezed ahead. The transitway slowed to a stop on the 11th Street of T25. Maria pulled out a flat white square from her worn Ross coat. The square, her input identity card, contained thousands of stored bits of information about her life, including her right to use the transitway. One by one, the people from both sides of the aisles converged up front, inserting identity cards into a thin computer slot next to the doors. The doors would slide open, allowing the computer just one person to pass at a time. The next person then would step up to the slot. Maria finally pushed her card into the slot, the event recorded in the computer, and she walked out into the transitway terminal. The open semi-circular terminal was usually dense with people. As she walked across the simulated rock square, she could see several young men talking to those who would listen. "What is this?" she asked the man who had gotten off the transitway ahead of her. "Another one of those eternal rallies," he answered, shaking his head. Maria, upon hearing the news, was just as aggravated. She hated the Eternalist, because Eternalism was a Greenie religion that was slowly spreading to the outside. Her own cousin, Andrew, had been infected by the mystifying rhetoric, and that's what bothered her almost as much as when she heard them speak. She tried to push her way through the oval opening to the streets inside, but the crowd was too thick and she would have to wait. Surrounding the terminal and spread among the crowd was the Quadrant Militia, the MMs, dressed in tight-fitting army garb with bright orange vests and helmets. In fact, the militiamen were stationed all over the Quadrant as a source of the Earth City Authority, and it was their presence at the terminal which kept the rally from getting out of hand. Maria surveyed the line to the street opening as the militiamen helped people through the opening in an orderly manner. Reluctantly, she turned and was forced to listen to the words of the speaker. In a strange but repetitious gesture, the younger man raised both his hands to his forehead as if he were shielding his eyes from the sun. He spoke with a euphemistic flow like he had consumed an entire liter of Supron. "Eternity is ever present in the air and the space around us. It has been seen by those who truly believe and will be seen again. But those among us who have not heard the eternal word, who is this divine presence that is eternity? Who is he who gives hope to mankind? For he has said that mankind is the flower of the universe, blossoming in the dark void, but only able to find fulfillment in him. He is Mohammed, he is Buddha, he is Jesus Christ, he is Confucius, bringing mankind together to strive for good. He has said that only goodwill and eternity will save mankind. He is the Eternalist, the one cast adrift from the unbelievers. But he will return, my brethren. Yes, the Eternal One will be heard once more. He will return, and we must be ready for the day. It is soon, the time is near. The signs abound all around us. Famines sweep across the swelling population, as the Eternal One has told us. The sun is quiet beneath the thick clouds, but let us not sink in despair. Let us believe in the word of eternity that will lead us to the wiser course. Eternity says that those not gifted with his foresight will perish under the dark clouds, and eternity will shape the world. Mankind will be destroyed by his offspring, the computer. The faith in the word of the Eternal One will prevent the apocalypse." Maria seemed to take personal offense to the young speaker as she thought of her cousin Andrew. They had taken over his mind, she thought, as she moved in the line to the opening. As she looked ahead, she saw the man who had once been very close to her. He was a militiaman, Captain Mike Stracco, who had let Maria slip away because of his obligations to the military. Inside, Stracco was torn by his devotion to his job and his feelings for Maria. However, he could not have it both ways, and she left him behind, pursuing the glamorous life of the habitat in Terrance Wilson. "Hey, Maria! Hey, Maria!" called the dark-haired Stracco. He was a husky man, older than Maria, half-shaven and hardened by his military experience. Despite this, he possessed a noble compassion and a gentle concern under his gruff military exterior. "Maria, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in weeks." "Hello, Michael," she said quickly as she looked ahead. "Coming back from work?" he asked with a smile. "As a matter of fact, I'm trying to," she said, motioning her head toward the rally. "Ah, they'll be done soon. We knew they were coming out here a long time ago," he said as he studied her slender face. "How did you know that?" asked Maria as she caught his blue eyes. "Just some information we got. Say, Maria, I talked to your mother on the screen today." "My mother?" she said as her heart pounded. "Yeah, she invited me to dinner tonight." "Well, that's certainly unexpected," she said, moving her mouth from side to side. "I get off duty in 15 minutes. Can you wait?" "Oh, well, I should be getting home," she said as she handed her card to the militiaman at the opening. He inserted it into the computer slot.
Maria, Almonte Street, A98, T25, cleared.
"You may go, Miss Almonte," said the militiaman. "Then I'll see you later," said Stracco as she passed through the opening. She nodded with a half-smile as old feelings were momentarily rekindled, and she stepped onto the street. S11 and its green neon-like modules ran 5 kilometers into the Greenie barrier, and the street's Zambian surface was just beginning to glow. She walked toward the sun, half hidden behind the low-hanging, rapidly moving clouds, and past the adjacent streets. There always seemed to be activity in the streets. Militiamen and 2 men in carts patrolled the streets on a regular basis. People as cold as the outside weather walked by each other, their heads tilted downward. It was quite common and a quite factual belief that people, rather than engage in human dialogue, spend a greater part of their time in conversations with the computers, who could provide instant knowledge. Maria quickened her pace toward A98, dodging people who were calling out for food, something unheard of on the outside. The sun was barely visible now in the green haze above her, but there were spectacular breaks in the clouds with actual touches of blue sky. However, the clouds could move in quickly and rob her of the fleeting beauty. She felt winded as she neared A98. The street glowed in the bright blue of the modules as she turned right. The modules had blocked out the remaining light of day and heightened the white street, assuming a fairy tale character. Maria's family lived on the 3rd floor module, perhaps a quarter of the way down A98. She slowed and she came in sight of the module as several men were milling around the outside. She came to a full stop and saw their fur-like garments and realized they were Greenies and they had somehow escaped the barrier. Terrified, she turned and ran toward S11. She called out for the militiamen, but they had completed their rounds and the Greenies were getting increasingly closer. S11 was still some distance away as she heard them yelling in a foreign language in a low, slurring gurgle. "Forget all we want," pleaded one of them as they overtook her at the end of A98, grabbing her from behind. "Eaten heaven for days," said another, his shiny green skin accentuating his bloodshot eyes. "Foolish, you will get it starving. We cannot," gasped another one as they dragged her to the side of the road. "I have no food," she cried. "Let me go." She swung back her arms. The first one called out, exposing his half-rotted teeth. "Liar, you are! Foolish outsiders always have food." Suddenly, without warning, a low-pitched, resonating sound repeated several times. A bright, glowing, violent energy sphere shot through the air, striking one of the Greenies and hurling him across the Zambian. The others soon relinquished their grip on Maria and ran in opposite directions. Mike Stracco, wielding a metal cylinder about the size of a flashlight called a blaster, fired at the fleeting Greenies. Another strong burst of energy filled the air, hitting the Greenies in the back, and they slid forward onto the street. Logistics, cried Stracco into his helmet transmitter. This is Captain Stracco. Get a cart down to A98. Continue the patrols. Captain, we'll step up the patrols on A98. Stracco out. Maria ran up to Stracco and held on to him. She was shaking almost uncontrollably. Michael. It's all right, Maria. They've been disabled and will be brought back through the barrier. You saved my life, Michael, she said, speaking into his vest. You were lucky, he said as he held her by the shoulders. Colonel Gibbs just happened to let me out early from the rally. What if he didn't? Where's your blaster? I forgot it. I don't carry my blaster, she said as she calmed down. You don't know what's going to happen nowadays, Maria. You should carry your blaster. The patrol car turned around at the corner as they continued. They leave us here on Earth, these lunar elites, Michael, to fight with the Greenies, to be force-fed food at their own discretion, to be stuffed into modules. It is what it is, Maria. They call us reprehensible because we're caged. Billions of people caged so the elites can have their control and their way of life. That may all be true, Maria, but carry your blaster. You have to carry your blaster. A Greenie attack? Asked the driver of the cart as it slowed. Over there, said Stracco as he pointed to the scattered Greenies across the Zambian. And Corporal, keep this cart in the area till the next patrol. Yes, sir, said the corporal as they began the roundup. They began to walk ahead toward their module. Stracco watched the Greenies being lifted into the cart and thought for a while before he spoke. His food supplies are low. There'd been some problems at the food plant. Sabotage? She asked. What makes you say that? Just a guess, she said, feeling more at ease. The Greenies will do anything. Funny, production in the habitats couldn't be better. Figures. By the way, how was your job? Same old grind. Did I tell you I made a grade 7? 7, beamed Stracco. That's great, Maria. You must be very happy. Grade 7, Michael. That means I can work anywhere on the planet. Becoming the same everywhere, believe me, cautioned Stracco. How would you know? She asked as she put her identity card in the computer slot in front of her module. I have my sources, smiled Stracco slyly. You and your sources, she said as she pretended to salute him. Stracco smiled broadly at her antics as the computer they called KD6 spoke to them.
Hello, Maria. How was your day?
Fine, Katie. I have Michael Stracco with me.
Hello, Captain Stracco. Please insert your identity card,
instructed the computer as he complied.
Very good. Please step on the mover.
They stepped onto the clear circle and sunk into the sparkling green light beneath the street. The mover followed the pathway ahead and up to the 3rd floor of the Almonte module. It opened to a sterile environment with no windows. All 4 rooms were constructed of a white Zambian and selected in definite areas. They stepped into the living room, a 5x7 meter box with a kitchenette in the rear. 2 sleeping rooms were adjacent to the living room and the cleaning room between them. Stracco removed his helmet as the mover closed. Maria, you're late, said Mrs. Almonte from the kitchen, with her back toward them. She was a large woman, too big for her tatted green rasscoat. As she turned, she saw them both and her face lit up. And Michael, it's good to see you two together. We're not together, said Maria. Michael just saved my life. Her father, listening to the outside conversation, appeared in the cleaning room doorway, wearing a faded turtleneck. What's that you say, Maria? Greenie attack, Frank, said Stracco. Michael, it's good to see you, said Almonte as he shook the captain's hand. And what is this you say, Greenies here on A98? I'm afraid so, said Stracco. Almonte grimaced at Maria. I told you to bring my blaster. I understand that. Maria repeated the words before he could say them. We've all been through that, Father. I won't forget it again. And if you'll excuse me, I have to get dressed for tonight. Almonte watched her pass by into the sleeping room. He turned to Stracco as the door shut. You know, Captain, they want to take away the blasters from us. Then we'll have no defense against the elites or the Greenies. She's going out with that guy Wilson again, said Almonte as his wife handed him a cup of Supron. I've seen them on the screen so many times, I don't like his type. He's just too sure of himself, said Mrs. Almonte from the back as she heated the proto-food she had taken from the conduits in front of the sink. Maria's usually smarter, added Almonte as he led Stracco to some block-like chairs in the front room. And I just don't trust that Wilson. He does like to fool around, blurted Stracco. Now, how do you know that? Almonte wanted to know. Well, I just assumed that he would. Oh, look, Frank, I've talked to Maria about Wilson before. As I imagine you have. She's 24 years old, not 10. She'll make up her own mind, for better or for worse. The sleeping room doors opened, and Maria, carrying her wardrobe, walked around and into the cleaning room, oblivious to the talk. She was inside for a few minutes and came out later when the computer sounded. Yes, Katie, what is it? Asked Mrs. Almonte.
A scan from a Mr. Terrance Wilson for Maria.
I'll take it in the sleeping room, called Maria as she emerged in a shimmering ruby Ross coat and a satin pink turtleneck. Stracco arose as she passed into the sleeping room. She certainly looks stunning, he smiled. Where did she get an outfit like that? Griped Almonte. She has benefits, Frank, insisted the mother. Food is low and she's spending her benefits on things like that? Continued Almonte as Maria closed the sleeping room doors. The full image of the flamboyant Terrance Wilson, standing in a well-furnished room, stood before her on the screen. He raised his eyebrows as she walked up to the screen, but appeared to be fatigued as he leaned against oak paneling. It's that guy Inspector Glass I told you about him, Maria. He keeps hounding me from the moon. As a matter of fact, he's calling me back in a few minutes. Can you come over here earlier so we can get out of this place? So if he calls later tonight, we'll be gone. Well, I haven't eaten and... Hey, I like that outfit. She turned around and waddled it fully for him. Look, Maria, we got plenty of fresh food over here. Come over now. All right, I'll be there in half an hour. That's my girl, he said as his image blinked from the screen. In the other room, Mrs. Almonte was finishing up in the kitchenette, bringing bowls of proto-food to the table. She released some water from the distilling tank and added minerals, and then took the cups to the table. It's all ready, Frank, she called to her husband. Come on over here and sit down, Mike, said Almonte. He and Stracco had been talking about Maria's cousin Andrew, who was once again late for dinner. I don't understand, Frank, said Stracco as they sat down. That kid was bound and determined to become a military man. Now he's hooked by these eternity people. He certainly has been, said Mrs. Almonte as she sat down. Maria, come on. Maria slid open the doors to the sleeping room. Dressed in her new clothes, she came to the table and stood across from Stracco. You look really great, said Stracco as he looked into her eyes. Thank you, Michael, she said quickly. You're going to eat with us, aren't you? Demanded her mother. No, I'm leaving for Terrance's right now. Stracco, trying to hide his anger, began to spoon the soup while Frank Almonte shook his head. When will you be back? Her father wanted to know. Tomorrow, I guess, she said as she looked back to the other sleeping room. Andrew's late again. Yes, he's late, said Almonte loudly as the computer sounded. Yes, Katie, answered Mrs. Almonte.
Andrew is at the mover.
Oh, of course, let him in. We've been waiting for him, shouted Almonte. Moments later, the blond-haired Andrew walked up the mover and raised his hands to his forehead. They were all silent to this eternal, transformed young man looking over at them. Praise be to the Eternal One, the Compassionate, the Foreseer, he said, opening his eyes wider as he smiled. Where the hell have you been? Blasted Almonte. I have been with eternity, Uncle, and I always will be. Andrew, are you all right? Asked Maria as she ran over to him and hugged him. She, being older than he was, felt a strong responsibility for this man who had lost both his parents. We are balanced with eternity, cousin. Balanced in... He said, raising his hands once more. See what? Asked Stracco curiously. See the signs, of course. The day is coming. The time is near. The second coming of eternity is drawing close, my friend. All right, cried Almonte, who had had enough. Andrew, go use the cleaner and come out to dinner. No, wait a minute, Frank, said Stracco as he rose and walked over to Andrew. What makes you believe a thing like that? I see crowded trillions as eternity has seen them long ago. The eternal Foreseer has felt famine and starvation. The sky grows dark and the air is cold. The time is near when we will see eternity again. Oh, I almost forgot, said Maria as she ran into the sleeping room. I can accompany her to the transitway, volunteered Stracco. Good, I appreciate that, said Mrs. Almonte as Maria came into the room holding a blaster, a smaller version of the militiaman's weapon. I've got it, and Mike has said he'll bring you to the transitway. I don't want him to have to go out of his way, she said as she looked over at Stracco. No, I have to go that way, he said as he grabbed his helmet. Goodbye, said Maria. Katie, open the mover. Stracco went over to Almonte and shook his hand as the green light from the mover flickered on the walls. Frank, nice to see you again. And thank you for dinner, Mrs. Sessions. I only wish I had stayed to finish it. Any time, Michael, any time, she said, holding on to his hand. Stracco walked briefly into the mover and the wall closed. You take them for granted, you know that? Asked Stracco as the mover headed for the street.
Did it ever occur to you that I have a plan to become an elite? Quite the opposite. Humans should not be controlled by other humans. It's possible to change all that. What, by dating an elite gigolo? That's enough. You talk a good game, Maria, saying you want change for the Reprehensibles. I think that's just a cover. Think what you want, Michael.
I know what I want, Michael, and I'll get it. Oh, you'll get it, said Stracco as he raised his brows. What's that supposed to mean? You'll have to decide that answer for yourself, Maria. Look, Michael, she said as they walked on the street. I've lived in these modules all my life. I didn't think you were like my parents. No ambitions, letting life slap them in the face while they sit by and do nothing. Well, that's not for me. Do nothing? Laughed Stracco. That's a good one for you to say. They've worked for their benefits their whole life and shared them with you. They provided for you, Maria. It's all about control, Michael. Control of humans, control of resources. And then they throw computers, nice computers like Katie, in all the modules. And they pipe proto-food into everybody's home. Everybody has enough of that sludge. And then they add Supron on top of it to dull the senses. Is that what you call living, Michael? Maria was quiet for some time as the green light of S11 soon shined on their faces. Gee, I'm cold, she said, tightening up her raincoat. You have a thermal covering. Why didn't you wear it? It's old and worn. I don't want to ruin my outfit. Well, Wilson couldn't stand for that. How long is he back this time? 2 weeks. Imagine that, said Stracco, who was getting bored with her babbling. It'll be 1 year this week since I met him. Imagine, a habitat supervisor and a grade 4 outsider. Grade 7, said Stracco. Oh, of course he was. I heard the story, he said as he stopped with the terminal in sight. Maria, I won't add anything else about what I think of Wilson. You said you hardly ever see the guy, but you'd be willing to plan your whole life around him. It seems to me that somebody else wanted me to do that, she said as she walked ahead of him. Frustrated, Stracco stood in place for a few seconds and then ran up to her, but she just stared at him and walked away. Come on, Maria, why don't you listen to me before you go? You're just jealous, she said as she stopped. Maria, he began, exposing his teeth as he talked to her. You and I were brought up together. We're outsiders. We know what it takes to survive. That habitat isn't our world. They don't have the same background and feelings about the world as we do. They're all pampered. They call us reprehensibles. I don't want to see you have that world in your grasp, only to lose it. I'm not going to lose that world, Michael. I'm going to use it. She inserted her card, checked with the militiaman, and went inside. Stracco was infuriated. He turned and kicked the Zambian. It was not so much that he couldn't have her, but he feared she was making a grave mistake. Mike, said a voice from behind. Stracco turned around and saw two of his fellow militiamen, Jeff Maxwell and Scott Aber. They were only lieutenants. Jeff, Scotty, what are you doing here? Is she going to see Wilson? Asked Maxwell. Yep. Tried to talk her out of it, but she's blinded by this guy. I'll wager 2 days' benefits that she comes back before Wilson leaves, said Aber. Come on, Scotty, all you do is wager benefits. Can't you see Mike's upset? Never mind me. What are you guys going to do down here? Gibbs wants us down at the armory. I think he has another IGU assignment for us, said Maxwell. The Reprehensibles, Chapter 4. The armory for T-25 was at the end of S-11, adjacent to a small square leading to the looming Greenie barrier. A multi-room complex, the armory, from the outside looked like any other module, but in reality there were 20 separate modules. Stracco and his lieutenants entered the overview room, filled with computer screens that gave the exact map images of T-25. Further maps were available upon request to the quadrant computers. Colonel Gibbs, a tall man with trimmed white sideburns, turned from the maps as the men entered the room. "Computer, seal the room. Gentlemen, please be seated." Gibbs and another man, a Major Badger, stood at the end of a long table. The men were seated and the Major began to speak. "We've just gotten off the screen to Earth City." "Earth City?" exclaimed Stracco. "Earth City, Captain," said Gibbs. "We've talked to the people at the Intelligence Gathering Unit Central. As you know, food supplies have been diminished here on Earth. I am now prepared to say that sabotage may be a key ingredient of the disruption of both food production plants and the fusion plants. Further, no one has been able to stop or even view the saboteurs. They enter the plants unseen, do their dirty work before anyone inside can stop them, and they leave before the authorities arrive. From the information we've received from a special IQU agent within the past 48 hours, we now expect another attack, right here in T-25. "Then you must know who's involved in these attacks," said Maxwell. "We do, but we can't relay that information to you until we have received confirmation," said Gibbs as he turned to Badger. "Major, this will be your assignment, gentlemen. Simply intelligence gathering. We want you inside that plant. You will be equipped with scanners, and your input retrievers will be given to the computers when you return to the armory. You will be dressed as production workers with the proper input cards should you be stopped. But we want you to be as anonymous as possible. I don't care what you see happen in that plant or who you see get killed. You are there for intelligence gathering only, and that is all." "Why not station a few units inside?" suggested Stracco. "I'd like nothing better than that, Mike, but as you know, the Hedge-Banks own the production plants." "And everything else," said Bear as they all laughed. "The Hedge-Banks," began Badger, still smiling, "will allow no quadrant interference with their activity, and we dare not tell them about our information before we confirm it." "And," said Gibbs, "and if the saboteurs are confronted, we'd be fighting them openly. In that scenario, we can confirm the identity of the saboteurs and avoid bloodshed until we evaluate the situation." "Could that mean more Greenies?" asked Maxwell. "Several of them were found outside T-19 fusion plant after its malfunction." "Jeff, malfunction may be a mild word. The plant won't reopen for a year now. As far as the saboteurs go, we'll brief you fully when you return from the plant," said Badger. "Computer, scan of production plant T-35 raw," ordered Gibbs. "Over here, man," he called as the scan filled the far screen. Badger pointed to a device at the scan, producing a red dot on the screen for perspective. "Now here we see the 3 vital areas of the plant and those subject to attack," he spoke, using the readout. "The raw materials warehouse and the processing tanks, the output conduits, and the power lines to the plant. Captain Stracco, you will take up a position in the warehouse. Maxwell in the conduit processing area, and Bear in the power lines area. Keep in mind that past attacks have been made with the use of locators, hitting the warehouse lines, processing tanks, and power lines. That, as I am sad to say, usually means a 6-month disruption of food. Materials are becoming increasingly hard to come by. Every lunar company, including the Lunar Aggregate Company on the moon, has their orders filled to the brim. We must stress," said Gibbs, "that you get yourselves in positions to scan everything that happens. It's very, very risky, and your lives will be in jeopardy. Communications will be shielded among you 3 only. Entry will be through standard disruption of their security scans. In short, the only way they should know that you're in the plant is if they see you." "When do we report, Colonel?" asked Stracco. "You will assume your normal duties tomorrow, allowing 2 hours for dinner and rest. At 8:30 tomorrow night, you will report back to the armory. Then we will bring you inside via the power and conduit lines to the plant. Then, gentlemen, you are on your own. Maria's transitway pulled over a hill on the artificial environment covering the habitat. Literally thousands of lights twinkled from the overwhelming structures as far as the eye could see. It was all such a powerful and majestic force to an outsider like Maria. As the transitway coasted to a stop, the computer sounded.
Rose Garden, Rose Garden.
Rose Garden was the particular section of the habitat where Wilson's family made their home. Maria had been there a few times, but as she stepped from the transitway, the wonder of the habitat still brewed within her. She was torn between the seductive nature of the upper life. The transitway terminal was very different from the ones used in the modules. It was 3 times as large, with an overhead bubble, cushioned waiting seats, and a luminous white floor. Along the base of the Zambian dome were elaborately dressed security men, not militiamen, in glittering white Rosscoats and green satin pants. "Good evening, miss," said the man as he inserted her card. Even the computers had a seemingly more refined and articulate voice than the ones in the modules.
This woman is a visitor. Her address is 1163 A98 T25. Her name is Maria Almonte, and she's been invited to share the privileges of the habitat for 72 hours.
"Thank you," said the man as he turned to Maria with the card. "Miss Almonte, your privileges have been inputted into your card, and do have a good time. Do you need assistance to arrive to your destination?" "No, thank you. I've been here before," she said, trying to act if she knew the inside ways. "Very well," he said. "Do have a pleasant time." Maria smiled and walked ahead to the opening. It was an arched opening to S11, but there were important exceptions. Above and rounding the arch was the word Rose Garden in heightened green letters. Below, the Zambian panels opened as she approached and entered a large room of chairs and tables. She sat down on the chair, in the softest and most relaxing chair she could ever remember. The room began to move downward as screen scans of the inside of the habitat were lowered in front of the doors. It was truly captivating for Maria as she stood and felt the rough texture of the screen as the image looked real. An outer square housed a central and quite unique spiral escalator. Instead of stairs, there were levels of block-like white chairs, 2 per level, facing each other on a central floor. Since the ride between the habitat floors could take minutes, the dwellers had time to relax and talk during the ride to the squares. Long boulevards stretched from the sides of the squares. These roads were divided by a central median of plants and flowers. The facades of the houses were closely linked together along the sides under a high blue ceiling. Depending on the zoning of the habitat, there were shops, stores, plush restaurants, and amusement areas, a striking contrast to Maria's sterile world. The room that she was in slowed to a stop, and the screen moved upward past the doors, revealing the exact image she had been viewing on the way to the habitat. She stood, feeling as if she were a habitat dweller, and she thought to herself that that feeling should go to all people on Earth. Walking with the most upright posture, she crossed onto the brick floor of the escalator square. She waited for an empty chair as the escalator was traveling, just slow enough to step on with little difficulty. People seemed to be everywhere, and although convivial to each other, they still possessed a strange reserve, a lacking of intimacy. Wilson's home was on the 9th level up, a 10-minute ride to that level. Maria disembarked onto a square similar to the ones below. Quickly, she headed for the central boulevard, passing several shops and stores. People were holding merchandise in their hands, and debating whether they should relinquish their benefits. On the outside, in her area, the closest people ever got to merchandise was on the outside scans, where they would order it through the computers. But the habitat was alive with activity. Soon, she was in the residential portion of Rose Garden and turned onto Red Cedar Boulevard. Oak Leaf Boulevard was to her right, and now she could see in the distance the next section of the habitat, Waterside. She checked her appearance in a tiny pocket mirror as she walked onto 901 Oak Leaf, the home of Terrance Wilson's family. It was a white Zambian clapboard dwelling with large paneled windows with black shutters. Taking a deep breath, she pushed her input card into the computer slot next to the door. The computer scanned both her and the card, notifying Wilson she was standing outside the door. "Oh, Maria, what a pleasure to see you, my dear," said Wilson's mother, Ann Wilson, her image in a miniature screen next to the slot. She was a trim woman, reddish-brown hair, and she did not look much older than Wilson himself. Do come in," she said as the door opened. Maria entered the house, immediately picking up a Supron odor. She passed through a darkened hallway to the stairs that led to the upper levels. Annie Wilson was standing in the light at the top of the stairs with a fresh vase of flowers. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson," said Maria, nervously running her hand through her dark hair. "You're looking well, Maria, my dear." "Thank you. Oh, fresh flowers. They smell divine," said Maria as she inhaled. "I'm getting rather tired of them. We have a contract, or I should say my husband has a delivery contract with the people at the flower shop to send daily flowers, but never mind that. Come inside." "Is Mr. Wilson home?" asked Maria as a young man not much older than Terrance Wilson arose from the sofa. But Maria began marveling at the lavishly decorated room, the red embroidered complex red wallpaper and the living plants and the holographic pictures of mountain reserves. "Who knows where my husband is? Maria, this is Nathan Latrobe, a close friend." She paused. "A friend of mine." "Hello, Martina." "That's Maria," she corrected him as he kissed her hand. "Of course, this," he said, motioning his arm around the room, "isn't too much for you, is it? I mean, you being stuck in one of those modules." "Shut up, Nathan," snapped Ann Wilson. "Maria, Terrance is upstairs, still on the screens to the moon. You know, lunar aggregate business. That Inspector Manfred Glass is harassing him unrelentlessly," said Annie Wilson, as one of her daughters came into the room. Habitat dwellers had no restrictions on the size of their families and could conceive their own children. The young girl, not yet 17, was dressed in a one-piece, skin-tight metallic suit. Her stringy blonde hair gave her lethargic eyes an added strangeness. "I shall be back, Mother," she said. "Aren't you even going to say hello to Maria?" said Anna Wilson as Latrobe snickered. "Maria," she said as she bit into a blue-colored apple and disappeared down the stairs. "Let's go upstairs to Terrance. He must be done talking by now." They climbed the carpeted stairs along the inside wall to the second floor of the Habitat house. "Between those damn kids and that Inspector Glass, I'm going to lose my mind. I can't take these things." "I'm sure it'll be all right," Maria assured her as she thought about what Stracco had said about the outside. But she kept thinking about Stracco as they reached the upper floor to Terrance's room. Terrance was sitting with his head in his hands as on the screen the bushy-browed Inspector Manfred Glass questioned him from the moon. The signals were simultaneous.
"You have admitted to being in that room, the relaxation lounge, with Andrea Constantine, some 15 meters from the spot of the murder, with 10 minutes unaccounted for. What were you doing with the daughter of the man who was so totally against you seeing her?"
"Just private talk."
"Why there?"
"Well, it seemed convenient," answered Wilson nervously.
"Your story's better match."
"Look, I'm sick of your bullying tactics."
"You listen to me, you finagler. I can get a warrant and have you back here in 12 hours, escorted by militiamen."
"What do you want from me?" asked the exasperated Wilson. "I told you everything I did on the morning of the murder."
"Yes? You told me everything you did from the time you left the sector station. I want all the facts. That's all, Mr. Wilson."
"Damn you, Glass! Leave me alone! I haven't killed anyone!" cried Wilson, clenching both fists as Maria stuck her head around the door opening. Wilson abruptly turned to his left, hoping Glass would not say anything more about Andrea.
"Visitors, Mr. Wilson?"
inquired Glass with a chuckle in his voice. "Yes."
"Well, I have more questions."
"Give me just 2 minutes, will you?"
"All right, 2 minutes. Nothing more."
"How gracious you are, Inspector," barked Wilson as the two lunar images disappeared. "Is everything all right, Terrance?" asked Maria as she walked across the carpet. "No," he said as he walked over to the computer terminal and pulled a card from the drawer. "I've got this for tomorrow." "Oh, the surprise?" The mountain reserve's in T29. It overlooks the entire valley. The mountain reserves? Exclaimed Maria as he handed her the card. I'm actually going inside a reserve? I don't believe it. Yeah, well, you just sit out here and wait until I'm through with Inspector Glass. He still is questioning you about that murder. He won't let up. Keeps pressuring and threatening to bring me back to the moon. Really? What kind of people do you have up here? No, he's from Earth City. What did you say to get him so upset? The truth, of course. I went upstairs to have a conference with one of the lunar aggregate vice presidents before the cargo ship left the hangar, he said, neglecting to tell Maria that the vice president was his lover. And he doesn't believe you? She asked as the inspector came back on the screen.
Are you ready?
Wilson motioned her to the hallway. Shouldn't be long. She nodded and Wilson closed the doors as she left. But she could hear Glass continuing his assault inside on Wilson. Annie Wilson walked out of the sleeping room at the end of the hallway, her head hung down as she came up to Maria. Oh, Maria, you startled me. I thought you were still inside. Is he still talking to this lunar guy on the moon? Yes, they called back, answered Maria. Terrance told me yesterday that your husband's grandfather is ill. Oh, it's so sad, she said, gazing down at the floor once again. Would you mind if I went in and visited while I wait for Terrance? Oh, no, if it wouldn't be a burden with you. I don't mind, really, I don't. Maybe you can get some response from him. He isn't talking that much these days, she said as she led Maria down the hallway. Opening the sliding door, she manfully brought Maria inside. Antone, someone is here to see you tonight. The room was indirectly lighted by long white boxes along the baseboards, and the drapes between the room were drawn across the windows on the wall to the boulevard. The old man, propped up on several pillows, sat on a wide bed to the right of the windows. What was left of his white thinning hair almost stood on end, and the sheets were pulled right up to his chin. His green eyes were placid and fixated to some faraway place, away from the confines of the dimly lit room. Thank you, Maria, said Annie Wilson as she shut the doors. Maria watched her leave and turned to the old man. She walked quietly over to the side of the bed near the drapes. Mr. Wilson, how are you doing tonight? She asked, but the man did not flinch. His eyes occasionally blinked as he looked into space. Maria thought it was wise to speak, nevertheless. I'm feeling well. It's rather chilly outside, should reach 0. That's cold, even for the 6th month. But she could not elicit even the slightest response from the old man. A barrier, not physical, had been constructed to shield out everything that did not suit his needs. All of his facilities seemed to be there, like the knowledge of books on a shelf. But, like that knowledge, it lurked behind the shelf, refusing to come out. Terrance and I are going to the reserve tomorrow, she said once more, hoping for a reply. I've never been to the reserve, she continued, pausing again. She stood on the side of the bed, frustrated by her efforts to rouse the old man. She pulled back the drapes. The boulevard light streamed against the wall. It was more crowded down on the boulevard now, people walking in both directions. People are so lucky here, she whispered to herself. The old man blinked several times, and the lines on his face deepened. Not looking directly at her, he spoke in a raspy, worn voice.
Do you really know what you're saying, or do you just only say what you know?
Maria's head jutted to the right. Is that a riddle?
Riddles are riddles, only when you don't have the facts.
Maria wandered over to the bed and tried to understand whether the old man had some keen insight or just confused. Maybe, she thought, he just liked to plague people with riddles. I don't understand, Mr. Wilson, she said as she sat on the edge of the bed.
My name is Antone Bartholomew Peter Wilson, the Christian name given to my father and mother 140 years ago.
Terrance is your grandson.
Great-grandson.
You mentioned Christian. I didn't know there were such people left. There are only eternalists. And I still don't understand your riddle. Slowly, the old man's arms slid under the sheets and he pulled them down to his chest, and he reached for her hand, holding it firmly.
I am from the past, 140 years in this body, but many hundreds in the mind. I know of other places and other times. You only know of this time and of this world as it exists today. The past is just a murky fog which you cannot see through, nor do you dare to see through. To look into the past is not the most expedient thing for you or anyone who exists today. You say they are lucky down there. I say they're not. They are most unfortunate. Most unfortunate,
he said as he swallowed.
They see what they have and what is given to them, never contemplating tomorrow, while they incinerate the past.
I don't know what you mean. People have to survive, she retorted.
You are blind, very blind, like those before you, the billions and trillions who have lived and died with such beliefs, passing them on to their children.
He said as he grew fatigued and paused for a short time.
It's never too late. But they don't realize that. Never.
But what is the point you are making, Anton? He seemed to become angry with her, and his inner thoughts exploded with a nuclear intensity. He moved himself higher up in the bed and talked very loudly, drawing out every word.
Blind fools, quadrillions devouring each other in their own spaces, of years gone by, of men and women and little children in the suburban dreams.
He said with great propensity, as if his eyes were actually seeing what he was speaking.
Moving where they wished and roaming the land on the wheels.
What are suburban dreams? She asked.
Oh, I think you know. The computers will not say.
He shouted, his eyes glowing.
The golden age of asphalt, superhighways and roads and metal coaches in tow and miles to go. Free spaces and Sunday rides in the fall.
Miles?
And when it was cold, it was 32 degrees to freeze, and they sledded on the hills and they bladed on the ponds.
He said as his eyes filled with tears.
Freezing.
Freezing is 0 degrees, she said as she tried to reason with him.
0 degrees centigrade, 32 Fahrenheit.
Fearing hot?
Fahrenheit. The homes and yards wide open for all to see. The private property domain.
I don't understand, she said with misty eyes.
I speak the truth and you think I'm mad.
No, I agree with you. I just didn't have that extra knowledge, she said as she squeezed his hand and he pulled it away.
Go! Go back to those who fail to see.
No, I see, she said as she backed away from the bed, facing the old man as she scuffled toward the door. Terrance had finished with Inspector Glass and opened the door to the sleeping room. I heard voices. Is he at it again? No, it's all right, said Maria. Goodbye, Anton, she called, and the old man pulled the sheets back to his chin and his face went blank as he passed into his self-imposed world. Terrance shut the doors and they headed for the hallway. He's crazy, you know. He'll scare you half to death if you listen to him. What he was saying about Miles and fearing the hot. Forget about him, will you? Just think about all the fun we're going to have. Did you like the reserve passes? He asked as they came to the top of the stairs. Oh yes, Terrance, I can hardly believe it. Are you hungry? Yes, I am. Has your mother prepared anything downstairs? Mother prepare something? That's a laugh. We're going out, Maria. Out for some food, then to a double-level apartment which I procured for the night. But I thought we were staying here tonight. Look, I went to the trouble of arranging all this, and I'm under a lot of pressure here, he said as he grabbed her by the arm. Don't be troublesome. You're going with me, he shouted as he pulled her toward the stairs. She yanked her arm back. Don't ever grab me like that again.
The old man had her all wound up. I'm about a half a second away from leaving this nonsense. What did I do? Let's go. Once she was on the boulevard, she realized that the old man had given her a history that mirrored how she felt about the Reprehensibles being herded into modules like animals.